The autumn air hung thick with tobacco smoke and celebration on October 13, 1847, at the Whitmore plantation in Virginia's Tidewater region. While the harvest festival blazed with lanterns and laughter in the great house, something far more terrible was about to unfold. By dawn, tobacco baron Edmund Whitmore and his three most trusted overseers would be nothing but ash and memory, their bodies consumed by flames that burned with the fury of 20 years of accumulated rage. The man who would orchestrate this fiery reckoning was not a warrior or a revolutionary leader, but a field hand named Caleb, a man whose calloused hands had learned to heal with herbs and whose quiet eyes had memorized every weakness of his oppressors. Tonight, Caleb would transform from invisible property into the instrument of divine retribution, his revenge as methodical as it was devastating. He had waited, planned, and prepared for this moment when the very foundations of the plantation would crack under the weight of his righteous fury. Before we continue with this tale of fire and justice, drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is over there, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The great house glowed like a beacon against the October darkness, its windows spilling golden light across manicured gardens where not a single weed dared grow. Inside, crystal glasses clinked with imported wine, while Edmund Whitmore regaled his guests with tales of his tobacco empire's expansion. The dining room table groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, and delicacies that cost more than most men earned in a year. Laughter echoed through halls lined with portraits of dead patriarchs, their painted eyes seeming to approve of the wealth built on human misery. The scent of expensive cigars mingled with perfume and the aroma of dishes prepared by hands that would never taste such luxuries. But beyond the circle of warmth and abundance, in the shadows where servants moved like ghosts, another world existed entirely. The slave quarters squatted in darkness, their wooden walls thin as paper against the autumn chill. Here, children huddled together for warmth while their parents whispered prayers for survival. The air smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the lingering fear that permeated every breath. No laughter rang out here, only the occasional cough, the soft weeping of a mother who would never see her sole daughter again, and the rustling of straw as someone shifted in their sleep, seeking escape from waking nightmares. Tonight, the contrast between these two worlds would collapse into fire and screaming, but the quarters remained silent, as if the very darkness held its breath, waiting for justice to finally arrive on wings of flame. Caleb had not always been a man of vengeance. Born on a smaller farm in North Carolina, he had entered the world with gentle hands that seemed naturally gifted for healing. His grandmother, a woman whose African memories still burned bright despite decades of bondage, had taught him the secrets of roots and herbs, how to draw poison from wounds and ease the passage of dying souls. She called him Little Doctor and whispered that his ancestors had been healers in the homeland across the water. When Caleb was 12, the farm failed, and he was sold south to Whitmore's tobacco empire, torn from the only family he had ever known. The journey in chains taught him that gentleness was a luxury he could no longer afford. At Whitmore's plantation, Caleb learned that his healing knowledge made him valuable enough to be kept alive, but never valuable enough to be treated as human. He tended the ailments of both slave and master, watching as his medicine saved the lives of men who would beat him for looking them in the eye. For 8 years he endured Edmund Whitmore's particular brand of cruelty, the master who spoke of Christian values while selling children away from their mothers, who preached about the natural order while forcing himself upon women who could not refuse. Caleb had loved once, a young woman named Sarah whose laugh could brighten the darkest quarters. But when Sarah became pregnant with another man's child, a white man's child, Whitmore sold her before the baby could complicate his property ledgers. The day she disappeared, Caleb felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, as if his heart had turned to stone. He continued his healing work, but now he also began to study his oppressors with the same methodical attention he gave to medicinal plants. He learned their habits, their fears, their weaknesses. He discovered which of his herbs could heal and which could kill. Most importantly, he learned to watch and wait, accumulating knowledge like a hunter tracking prey across seasons. The gentle boy who had once cried over injured birds had transformed into something else entirely, a man whose patience was as dangerous as winter ice, whose stillness masked a fury that would soon consume everything in its path. The Harvest Festival provided the perfect opportunity, and Caleb had been preparing for months with the precision of a master craftsman. He knew that Edmund Whitmore always invited his three most trusted overseers to the celebration: Jonas Mitchell, who delighted in wows, ipping children; Samuel Hartwell, whose wandering hands had violated too many women to count; and Thomas Brennan, who had once beaten a man to death for the crime of learning to read. These men would drink heavily, their guard lowered by wine and false security. Caleb had studied their patterns, noting how Mitchell always passed out in the library chair by midnight, how Hartwell preferred the garden pavilion for his late-night cigars, and how Brennan inevitably ended up in the barn, checking on his prize horses one final time before bed. In the weeks leading up to the festival, Caleb had begun his preparations with the methodical care of a surgeon. He gathered his grandmother's most dangerous herbs: oleander for the heart, nightshade for the mind, and white snake root to ensure suffering. But poison alone would not satisfy the debt these men owed. Fire would be his final judgment, and for that he needed accelerants. Slowly, carefully, he diverted lamp oil and turpentine, hiding small quantities in places only he knew. He fashioned crude but effective torches from corn husks and pine pitch, storing them in the abandoned root cellar behind the quarters. Each night he would slip away to practice lighting fires quickly and silently, timing himself until the motions became as natural as breathing. He studied the great house's layout during his medical visits, noting which rooms had only one exit, where the floorboards creaked, and how sound carried through the walls. Caleb even tested his poisons on rats, watching their death throes with the cold calculation of a man who had moved beyond mercy into the realm of absolute justice. The night before the festival reached its crescendo near midnight, just as Caleb had predicted. The great house throbbed with music and drunken revelry while he moved through the shadows like a creature born of darkness itself. His first target was Jonas Mitchell, the child whipper who now sat slumped in Whitmore's leather chair, snoring over an empty bottle of bourbon. Caleb entered through the servant's door, his bare feet silent on the wooden floors. Mitchell's breathing was labored, his face flushed with alcohol, perfect conditions for what came next. From a small vial hidden in his shirt, Caleb extracted a concentrated dose of white snake root mixed with nightshade, enough to stop a horse's heart. He forced the liquid between Mitchell's slack lips, watching as the man's body convulsed once, twice, then went still. But death was not enough, not for this demon who had laughed while beating children. Caleb soaked the chair and surrounding books with lamp oil, then struck his flint. The flames caught immediately, turning the library into a furnace that would erase Mitchell from existence itself. The fire's orange glow reflected in Caleb's eyes as he watched his first oppressor burn, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of a job well begun. Samuel Hartwell was enjoying his cigar in the garden pavilion when Caleb found him, the overseer's face flushed with wine and anticipated pleasure. He had been eyeing one of the young serving girls all evening. Caleb approached from behind, moving with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. A quick strike to the base of the skull dropped Hartwell to his knees, consciousness fleeing, but not death. Not yet. Caleb wanted this one to understand what was happening, to feel the terror that so many women had felt under his touch. He forced oleander extract down Hartwell's throat, watching as the man's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "You remember me, Caleb whispered, his voice soft as falling leaves. "You remember all of us." The pavilion became an inferno within minutes, Hartwell's screams joining the crackling of burning wood as Caleb walked away without looking back. Thomas Brennan died in the barn among his precious horses, the animals screaming in terror as flames consumed everything around them. By the time the great house's occupants realized what was happening, 3 separate fires were already beyond control, and Caleb had saved the best for last. Edmund Whitmore emerged from his burning mansion like a figure from hell itself, his fine clothes singed and his face blackened with smoke. But Caleb was waiting in the garden, standing calm and still as death among the roses that had been tended by enslaved hands. The master saw him there and stopped short, some primitive instinct recognizing the predator that had been hiding in plain sight for so many years. "You," Whitmore gasped, his voice hoarse from smoke and disbelief. "It was you." Caleb nodded slowly, his dark eyes reflecting the flames that consumed the empire built on his people's backs. He held up a small bottle containing his final preparation, a mixture that would burn from the inside out, turning blood to fire and bones to ash. "They taught me well, Master," Caleb said, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of accumulated suffering. "Every herb, every poison, every way a body can die. You wanted me to be useful, and I am." The struggle was brief and one-sided. Whitmore, soft from years of luxury and weakened by smoke, could not match the wiry strength of a man who had spent his life in backbreaking labor. Caleb forced the burning mixture down his master's. By dawn, 4 men were dead, and their kingdom of tobacco and terror had become a smoking wasteland. Caleb stood among the ruins as the sun rose, his work complete, his hands finally clean. He made no attempt to run or hide. Instead, he sat down among the ashes and waited for them to come for him, knowing that his message had been delivered in a language every plantation owner would understand. The authorities arrived with the morning light, their faces pale with shock at the scope of destruction. 3 buildings reduced to smoldering foundations, 4 prominent men dead, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in property destroyed, all apparently by one quiet field hand who had seemed as harmless as a house cat. Caleb offered no resistance when they bound his hands, no pleas for mercy when they dragged him to the county jail. During the trial that followed, he sat with the dignity of a king, while prosecutors painted him as a mad dog who had turned on his masters. The courthouse packed with white faces twisted by rage and black faces carefully neutral, afraid to show any expression that might be interpreted as approval. When asked to explain his actions, Caleb stood and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "They taught me chemistry with their herbs, patience with their whips, and precision with their cruelty. Every skill I used, they gave me. Every lesson I learned, they provided. I am exactly what they made me." His words sent ripples through the community like stones thrown into still water. Plantation owners began to eye their own slaves with new suspicion, wondering what dangerous knowledge they might have imparted in their casual cruelty. The trial's outcome was never in doubt. A black man who killed white men would hang, regardless of provocation or justice. But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the county, a recognition that the full balance of power built on terror and submission might not be as stable as they had assumed. Even the prosecutor seemed shaken as he delivered his closing arguments, his voice lacking the usual fire of righteous indignation. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning their verdict, but their faces showed no satisfaction, only the grim recognition that they were participants in a system whose foundations were beginning to crack. The hanging took place on a gray November morning, attended by hundreds of spectators who came to witness the end of the man who had dared to strike back at his oppressors. Caleb walked to the scaffold with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout his trial, his head high and his step steady. When the preacher offered him a chance to repent, Caleb looked out over the crowd and spoke his final words. "I repent nothing, Sarah. I hope you can rest now." The rope snapped his neck cleanly, but his death only multiplied his power. Within weeks, stories of his rebellion had spread throughout the slave quarters of Virginia like wildfire. Mothers whispered his name to their children as a promise that justice, however delayed, would eventually arrive. The burned ruins of the Whitmore plantation became a pilgrimage site for those brave enough to visit, each visitor carrying away a handful of ash, as a reminder that even the mightiest oppressor could fall. Edmund Whitmore's surviving family sold the land and fled north, unable to bear the weight of memory that pressed down on every acre. Other plantation owners increased their security, hired more overseers, and tightened their control. Caleb became more than a man. He became a symbol, a reminder that oppression always carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. His name joined the secret pantheon of resistance heroes, spoken in hushed tones around cooking fires and passed down through generations as proof that even the powerless could claim their due. What does it mean when the very skills meant to ensure survival become instruments of revenge? When hands taught to heal learn instead to kill with the same gentle precision? Caleb's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the violence that built our nation and the fury that such violence inevitably generates. His was not random brutality, but calculated justice. each death a direct response to years of accumulated cruelty. In the quiet moments before sleep, we might ask ourselves, how many other Calebs walked among their oppressors, memorizing weaknesses and waiting for their moment? How many gentle healers were transformed into angels of vengeance by systems that mistook kindness for weakness? The tobacco that built Virginia's wealth was seasoned with tears and watered with blood, but history books rarely mention the cost paid by those who planted and harvested it. Caleb's fire burned away more than buildings. It illuminated the moral rot at the foundation of an entire society, revealing how oppression inevitably breeds the very resistance it seeks to prevent. His legacy lives not in the destruction he caused, but in the reminder that human dignity, once pushed beyond its limits, will always find a way to strike back. Every plantation owner who tightened security after hearing his story was acknowledging a fundamental truth: that no system built on cruelty can ever truly sleep peacefully. If you enjoyed this story of resistance and redemption, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. It really helps the channel keep bringing real stories that never make it into the history books. These tales of courage in the face of impossible odds deserve to be remembered, and your support ensures that voices like Caleb's continue to echo through time, reminding us that justice, however delayed, finds a way to burn bright in even the darkest corners of history.